we sort of start off with, how do we actually know each other?
How do we know each other? I remember being walked into my office as part of, I believe it was the first campaign around building that Osmazing, the wanting to brand something for the teams that would give us something to unite around. And I remember you being marched into my office and I'm thinking, this guy looks really neat. It's got some really neat conceptual stuff. And that was it. That's what I remember. And the imprint was there as much for me as it was for you. I continued to follow you. And I'm grateful that you reached out and that we had that connection.
Sweet. So for the audience listening, Gayle and I met at a company a couple of years ago, and I was acting as an art director at the time in that company. And Gayle was primarily in sales enablement. And we shared a very similar energy.
Yes.
And that playful, fun energy, which that place didn't have at all, by the way.
No. No, it was terribly dreary and dreadful. And so I think you and I were the breath of fresh air.
We're like patting ourselves on the back here.
Totally. But I have other people that would concur. I have other people that I could line up that would absolutely agree. You guys were the breaths of fresh air.
Yeah, no, I think it's a mutual admiration for that sentiment there. But for the audience listening, that's how sort of we know each other. But before we actually get into some of your backstory and your learnings, and potentially also sharing some insights of what you tried and tested over the years, because you have incredible experience, I would love to start with, before we actually get into your backstory, is what is your current role, the short version of it, because we're going to circle back to your current position at the tail end of the podcast to talk more in depth about what you're currently doing. But just for the audience listening, who is Gayle and what is she currently doing?
So currently I'm working with vArmour, which is a startup based out of California. We have a presence in Calgary as well, a lot of big development team. We also have a development team out of Lithuania. We're definitely a global company in that sense, but we're very small. And the company itself has just sort of pivoted in the last few years. I'll be hitting my 1 year with them next week. So Global Director of Sales Enablement. I'm a one-woman band, as I often am in especially organizations that are just bringing sales enablement into in-house. And so, that's what I'm doing, working with a relatively small, compared to what I've been used to in the past, a small sales team of sales directors. We have a couple of VPs, a few general managers, and 2 BDRs. And really interesting new role called market research analyst, which we can talk about a little later.
Oh, sweet. Okay. So we're definitely going to talk about some of this stuff. But one thing I heard, and when we were trying to schedule this call, that you've moved, so you no longer live in Brampton/Toronto.
Yes.
So where did you move?
So I moved to Winnipeg, which was my hometown, my birth town. I came back about 1.5 years ago because both my parents were experiencing health issues. When it was one or the other, it was relatively easy to jump on a plane from Toronto and commute back to here to help out. But when it became both of them, I realized that a lot of the healthcare issues for each of them were falling through cracks. My brother was the only one here. My sister lives abroad. So it just felt like the right thing to do for the oldest child to come home and help. So we did lose my mom in April. As much as I am not thrilled to be back in Winnipeg because it doesn't feel like home anymore, I'm so grateful that I was able to be here to have that last 1.5 years with her before we lost her. And now it's with my dad. And, we get asked often, when your parents are eventually gone, will you stay in Winnipeg? And at my best guess right now is probably not. Where will I be? I don't know. But Ontario felt like home. I mean, I did live my entire adult life there. So as much as Winnipeggers who leave Winnipeg will always call Winnipeg home, but you can't come back. I mean, I can't come back. other people may be able to come back successfully. It's a place to live. I'm lucky enough, fortunate enough to be able to be a remote worker. So it really doesn't matter where I am. So, but I miss Toronto desperately.
Yeah, the Steve Martin quote, like Toronto is just like New York minus the cool stuff.
Well, it's funny because there's always been a rivalry, of course, in Canada between the West and the East, and Winnipeg and Toronto especially. It's always been a headbutt. And people who've moved to Toronto through the years and come back to Winnipeg, even for visits, we get clumped into this sort of morass of, oh, you guys are just snobs from Toronto. You think that you're the center of the universe. And I'm like, it's got nothing to do with that. I spent a week back in Toronto in March. And the second I walked out of Pearson and got in an Uber and went downtown, which was where I lived, I was like, I'm home. It was March. I had the windows wide open. The Uber driver's going, Mom, you're not cold? I'm like, you don't understand. I need to breathe the air of home. It's because it's where I lived my adult life. It's because that's where I know how to navigate. So even things, especially when you're coming back to deal with people's healthcare issues, from province to province, it differs. I would know how to navigate those things in Ontario because I did it for 35 plus years. Coming back here, trying to navigate my parents' healthcare, I don't know where to go. I don't know what to do because, again, I left so many years ago. So it's got nothing to do with snobbery or center of the universe issues. It's got everything to do with where you spend the bulk of your time and build some roots, right? So my roots really now are there, although my original roots were here.
Right. So do you have, and I know that you mentioned that you left at a very early age and you've spent primarily your adult life in not in the center of the universe, but do you have any like fond memories or anything, memories or experiences that you could recall from growing up in that small town that have sort of carried forward into your life now? Could you think of, in school
growing up in Winnipeg, you mean?
Growing up or in your early years?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's interesting. I just did a session at my local camp, so the camp that I grew up in. I went to summer camp. I was a camper. I was a counselor. I worked my way into administration. And they called me and asked me to come and do a session for their incoming counselors this year who were quite young. And they wanted to impress upon them the responsibility, the amount of responsibility they would have as camp counselors at a sleepaway camp. So I came in and I did a whole session with them around skills. Let's hone in on your skills. So I started off by bringing them into the room and giving everybody a balloon. I had them stand in a big circle, blow up your balloon, tie it up, and you have to bounce your balloons and keep, Gayle, fun, right? Keep them up in the air. And the balloons cannot hit the floor. That was the rule of the game. I said, now you're going to feel a tap on your shoulder. When you do, leave the circle, but your balloon must remain. And everybody who remains in the circle has to keep that balloon up in the air for you. So of course, by the end of it, we were from 30 people down to about 5, and the balloons were everywhere. There was no more control. And that was what was the lesson learned? Of course, teamwork. It makes the dream work. We can't have other people we can't depend on other people to do our jobs as well, right? So we started off with that. And then I sat them down and said, all right, here's the job that's expected of you from a skills person. It's job description. Now, I want you to sit down in little groups and talk about what skills is it going to take you to get these tasks done. So they spent some time looking at that. Then we separated those skills into what are hard skills, what are soft skills. And then I wanted to move them towards understanding what competency was. So the next step was taking them through my own journey and saying, listen, here's my history, exactly like yours. I was a camp counselor. From there, I moved to administration. Then I got my first job when I got out of school. I got called up by somebody else because they knew about my experience from camp. And so they tapped me on the shoulder and said, you've got great energy. We'd love to have you here. And that's how my first job came. And and I showed them how throughout my career, and I've had 5 pivots in my career, throughout each of them, all the building blocks were established at camp. based on that skill set. So then we talked about competency. What does competency mean, and how competent are you in doing the work that has to get done? So I had built out job descriptions for about 20 jobs, ranging from blue all the way to white. So we had welder, electrician, plumber, actuary, lawyer, doctor. And I mapped out what are the skills that are required of these jobs? What are the competencies expected from these jobs? And I sat them back down in their groups and said, all right, you came up with a bunch of skills you were going to need to work your job at camp. Now, I want you to map them back to each group got about 4 job descriptions. Look at these job descriptions. Tell me how many skills are applicable to the careers that you have sitting in front of you. And of course, the lesson learned was everything that they're going to be doing this summer at camp, they would carry through as threads throughout their careers, whether they were going to be a welder or a doctor. Teamwork was always going to be expected. Cooperation, collaboration, those are all things that, although we establish those skill sets at a young age, we don't tap into them, we don't know them, we don't identify them, but they continue to play throughout our careers. So from there, I took them on. I thought about what would I have wanted to get earlier in my career? What would I have wished somebody had shared with me? Because I was in social services, mostly in my younger days, the notion of metrics and results, it didn't play in my world at all. But of course, as I grew into the corporate world, it was a big deal. And, everything from interviews to resumes to getting the job done, it was all about what results are you driving? So I thought, how can I give them that tool? I found the STAR methodology, which is the situation, task, action, result. And I mapped my own story from being 16 years old at camp to say, here's my story. So situation. The situation was I got called. We'd like you to come work at camp. We'd like you to head up the arts and crafts. The task was you have to head up the arts and crafts, but you have no budget to do it with. You have to use up the existing supplies in the cupboards from previous years. I'm like, great, no, give me the challenge. So what was the action? I had to come up with a program that was going to engage the kids, but do it on a limited or zero budget. So I had to take inventory of my existing stock. I knew that kids, each group was going to see me about 6 times throughout a camp session. So the first session with each group was a trip down to the beach. We're going to go gather nature supplies, things like driftwood and rocks. And I completely revamped the way we did approach the arts and crafts program. So instead of doing the typical activities that every year kids from camp came home from camp with bottles with wax on them or candles, or this year they came home with painted rocks. They created macrame that hung from driftwood, and they were engaged in the process and they collected their own supplies. So what was the result of that? Not only did I have happy campers who were excited to bring home different crafts, excited to have worked on different crafts. What did that do for camp? It drove repeat attendance. So I actually helped camp make money. Nobody would have, if you would have shared that with me when I was 16, it would not, I would have been, what are you even talking about? But in the sequence of progression of the workshop that morning, it was like little light bulbs came on, which that's my motivation. I mean, as a teacher, inherently, that's my motivation. So it was brilliant. So you ask what skills? I mean, it was my camp experience that sparked my creativity, sparked my energy, obviously it's innately there anyway, the energy and the fun but camp allowed that to blossom. And then I spent a year when I was 15 going on 16 in Israel, away from my family on a kibbutz in a 10th grade program with a bunch of kids my age. We had to be superstars to be accepted into the program, because if you're going to live for a year without your family and study in dual languages and keep your grades up, obviously you had to be the kind of person that could manage all of that. That hugely shaped me. I came back from that experience and I was torn between 2 countries, 2 worlds. I was here in Canada, but I wanted to be back there. I had 1 foot here, 1 foot there. I had friends here, I had friends there. And I think the biggest thing coming out of the Israel experience was starting to learn to say goodbye. and seeing that things in life are so temporary, right? I had this amazing experience for this year. I bonded with these people in my class. Like they were, to this day, I will call them my siblings. I mean, we spent an intense year of growth together, right? But then it ended and we had to say goodbye. And that was the hardest goodbye I've ever had to say. I cried my way all the way home to Canada. But it gave me, my life has been one of transience. I've not settled in any one place for any great length of time. So my life has been a series of goodbyes. It's made it a little bit easier. So that was a lesson learned too. Kind of all over the map, I know.
No, this was brilliant. Actually, there's so many little nuance points in terms of what you were saying in the story. Yeah. And we can actually go backwards in terms of what you said. And I would love to sort of dive a little bit more. And of course, you'd be like, Paul, I don't want to go down that path and you can help me.
I'm an open book, Paul, open book.
But, this aspect of, you're talking about building that skill of, or that internal tool of emotional regulation. And I think that is such a crucial role that a lot of like Harvard Business Review and all these different, process and like corporate strategy, like leaders should have emotional regulation. I would love for you to unpack that a little bit more in terms of, that skill that, how you learned to say goodbye and you were torn and how you built that internal infrastructure and now how that sort of translates over some of the things that you do.
So interesting. Such a great question. And one that I really haven't thought about a lot. So forgive me if I bumble along here a little bit, but the emotional regulation. So it's funny because I was always the emotional one and everybody wanted to shield Gayle growing up from the emotional stuff because she's really emotional. And I think it's because my parents couldn't deal with emotion in general. My mom was very much a cold fish in that regard. She wasn't the huggy, like the Gayle that comes entirely from my father's personality. He's outgoing, he's gregarious, he's warm, he's huggy. That's who I am. My sister's 100% my mom. So it's interesting how we each came out much more regulated, I would say. So my mother was the regulated one. My father was the one that was overly emotional. And I tended towards my father much more in terms of my own character. So for years, I was told you're too emotional. What does too emotional mean? And now in retrospect, I realize how trauma inducing that must have been for me in my youth, right? That I can't cope. It's essentially conditioned to believe that I couldn't cope with things, right? Well, when you push that down to somebody for a long period of time, especially at a young and impressionable age, they start to believe it. So I think that played a huge part. And to this day, I don't know that I'm emotionally regulated enough to be a role model in that sense, right? I wouldn't look at myself and call myself a paragon of emotional regulation by any stretch. But I think I'm first and foremost, I am authentic. What you see is what you get. I don't have a face for corporate. I don't have a separate face for home. Gayle is who you see and who you hear. And I believe that we're all innately human, and that's what we bring to the role. I get far too emotional still in situations at work. I've had to learn over the years how to express that anger in an email, but put that email in the draft box and don't even look at it again until you've slept, right? So it's little things like that I've learned over time, but not until I sent that first angry email and I got the response back. Not until I have to learn the hard way. That's who I am. Make me trip before I realize that this is a dangerous place to walk. So I think it's interesting because the emotional regulation, I don't know if I'd call myself emotionally regulated, but I did learn tips and tricks over the years, like I just shared and how I apply that in my day to day. So,
yeah, no, definitely. This is
a good answer, but
I think one thing that's definitely very refreshing, and I'm not just saying this because we're recording this podcast, is that a lot of times when I come close to or get exposed to like the corporate world and typical corporate, type A kind of personalities, or subject matter or domain experts, they typically tend to lean towards talking in jargon, their industry taxonomy.
Exactly.
And one thing that I found really refreshing about you, and even based on now going back to the first thing that you were talking about, the camp example, is that you're constantly taking examples from real life.
Yes.
And applying them in a fun, playful way in this environment. So which just cuts right through all of that complicated jargon speak. And it's not like a techno babble. So it resonates with people. And that's what resonated with me. That's how I sort of started, leaning towards, what you had to say and really want to understand and, got more curious. So question really here is, the first part was more like an observation, but the question really here is that, was this a very deliberate effort on your part, or did you try out those very corporate style frameworks and processes and you were like, wait, so what has your journey been, or why do you approach it the way you do it?
So first of all, growing up, my aspirations, my goals were to be a mom and a wife. That's what I wanted out of life. I had no career aspirations. I had no literally, I was even on a panel when I was 17 years old talking about what does the future look like and what are your goals, and there were other people on the panel who were, I want to be a doctor and I'm going to be a lawyer and I'm going to save the world. And I'm like, I want to be a mom and a wife. That's what I wanted. I wanted 7 kids. I had an aunt and they would all be named like India, and they'd be walking through fields of marigolds in beautiful flowery dresses, barefoot. And my aunt looked at me in Israel and said, talk to me after the first. I have 1 child. In real life today. But I really didn't have those career goals and those aspirations. So I knew nothing about corporate. And like I said, my world revolved initially around social services. I was a camp counselor. I was a program manager at a Y. I was a teacher. I didn't know corporate. I didn't know the business world. I never took a business course. I didn't understand economics. I don't understand that world that I was thrown into. My bent toward everything came from the place of creativity in me, right? So I wanted to, I applied my teaching skills to, when I gained technology skills, I applied my teaching skills to technology and became a tech trainer. And that allowed me to, again, I hated the curriculum I was working with. I built my own stuff. Again, it appealed to the creative side of me. So I was never cut out for that corporate. I never had aspirations of being a VP of anything or a president of, I just want to do the work that inspires me, that will be motivational to other people. And so I don't do politics. I hate politics. I don't want to be in the middle of that. I don't play the game well because it is a game. And it's incongruous with the authenticity who is me, right? I even struggled with that if we take it back to camp in the early days. I remember once I got to be a counselor, the rigorous competition that they were driving at camp. They'd have these events like 2-day team events where the whole camp is divided into 2 teams. And for 2 days, you're competing against each other on every level. And I'm like, why do we have to be so weirdly competitive? I didn't understand it. I just wanted everyone to play nice together. So I don't know that if you would never have looked at me at 20 years old and said, this woman's cut out for corporate and she's going to make it, It's not what my aspiration was. It's not what my aspiration is today. So,
right.
So how did I, I made my way through it and I've managed over time and I've had some really good mentorship along the way. But again, you can't fit me into a box. Which is why I'm global head of, and I'm not a VP and I don't aspire to the VP-dom. Like it's not a thing. So anyway.
That's really good to know because, as you express some of these intrinsic values that you have about yourself and how you see the world and, how camp shaped you, or even growing up maybe in a smaller town versus the Toronto, where, so your early ideas formed by just being exposed to that environment and being part of like camp and all that stuff, and how that sort of now trickles across in just the way you approach the work. Like I was overhearing one of the podcasts that you were on, and you were talking about even when you're teaching like sales enablement to reps and whatever, you use the car buying, your car buying experience. I would love for the audiences, who might not know that story, if you could repeat that story.
For sure. So one of the things that I try to impress upon folks who are in the world of selling is that listen, we appreciate and recognize it's not an easy job to do. And we have a lot of stereotypes that we have to overcome, like used car. Right. So I use the car analogy buying story because I think it really sort of says to folks who are in the selling business, this is the way you need to change the way you're thinking. It's about bringing value to the client. So my car buying story, I know I need a new car. I've established that. I'm now going to do my research. Paul, if you were researching where to get what kind of car, where would you do that research?
I actually spend a lot of time looking at the Porsche website.
So you're online doing that. You don't go down to the Porsche dealership and touch and feel. No, you look online. You sort of suss it out and figure out, what do I want? So I knew that I needed, based on my needs, I was looking at an SUV. I did my research online, which says to you, the seller, I am 65% through my buying cycle. I've done all the work. And now I need to touch and feel the vehicle. Well, the only way to do that in today's world, in Canada anyway, because we don't have Carvana, is to actually go and test drive. Now, if you could test drive without a salesperson beside you, would you?
Yes.
Every salesperson I know says the same thing. Well, how do you think people feel about you? Right? So I have no choice. I walk up to my choice was between a Toyota and a Honda. I'd made that decision. So I go to the Toyota showroom, get in a car. I've got the salesperson beside me and he's pushing every button. He's opening the skylight. He's showing me the bells and the whistles, and I'm completely tuning him out because I know all of these things. That's one of the reasons I chose this vehicle, right? All I want to do is drive it. Shut up. So I thank him very much when we get back to the dealership and I go across the street to Honda. I get in the car. The guy looks at me and starts schmoozing, like just a lovely person-to-person conversation. And you see from our discussion here, I am an open book. Well, all he has to do is pull a couple of threads and he gets me with the verbal diarrhea, talking and talking and talking. We get back to the deal and it's got nothing to do with the car, none of it. We get back to the dealership and he says, hey, Gayle, I know you mentioned that your husband and, is thinking about starting up a delivery service and you're moving your daughter all the time. I know that the back seats go down in this vehicle. Can I just show you how far they go down to see if it meets the need? Sure. And then he said, I meant to ask you, you had a step stool in the back of your car? Well, yeah, because my parents had just come to visit and it was harder for them to get in and out of the vehicle. Well, I don't know if you know, but running boards come standard on our vehicles. So you could eliminate Now, who am I going to buy the vehicle from? The guy that told me everything I already knew or the guy that brought me value?
That's like such an obvious answer. Obviously, the person who knows your family, knows your context, the second person.
That's it. Exactly. And it's so funny because I have the technical background. I got an MCSE along the way. I'm a Microsoft certified systems engineer on NT4. I know the techno speak, but it doesn't feel natural to me. So I have this, that's one of the joys of sales enablement is the expectation is that I will distill the complicated into something simpler. So even the way I tell the story of where I work now is not, if you listen to me versus the VP of Solutions Engineering, who sounds so eloquent in his technical description of all of the things that we do, and then you'll get the Gayle story, which is actually kind of fun. But so if you want to hear it, I'm happy to share that one as well.
Yeah, I actually had some questions regarding what you just said, but sure. I'm totally open to that story as well.
That story too. So people ask what we do here. When I first, and I was recruited here by the chief revenue officer, I got a random LinkedIn notice of like May 31st last year saying a mutual friend with great admiration suggested we must speak. I'm like, you are the consummate sales guy, because now I got to know who our mutual friend is. So of course I'm going to speak to you. Long story short, I was put through an interview process where it felt more like they were asking me to interview them as opposed to the opposite. So I walked in, and from every single person, I asked the same thing. What do you do? Why do you do it? Who do you do it for? And what does it do for them? So based on the answers that I got, I tried to sort of cobble together, because this area of technology is relatively new to me. I've spent many years in cybersecurity, on the cybersecurity side of things, but I've always been on the perimeter. My last company was FireEye. We were the moat around your house. We were the bars on your window. We were the alarm system. But even there, we had gotten breached. So we used to say to our clients there, it's not if it happens to you, it's when. Now come to vArmour. vArmour tackles, now they're inside your house. Now what? So what I cobbled together, and I shared with our CEO the first week I was here, I said, here's what I understand that we do. Now I have to figure out, the bad guys are about to enter my house. I have to figure out what's of prime importance to me and how to protect it. So I have to, first of all, label things, right? And figure out, all right, most important in my house is my kitchen light. Why? Because the kitchen is where I nurture my family. It's where I cook. It's where I feed them. I need my kitchen light on all and available all the time. So I'm going to deem that a high priority 10. But then I look at my toaster oven and say, maybe it's a 2. If it breaks, I can make toast in the oven. Not a big deal. But what I'm not factoring in is that my toaster oven is on the same breaker as my kitchen light. So if it goes down, it could bring my number 10 down. So by virtue of its association with the kitchen light, I have to make it a higher priority. Now, imagine having to take a clipboard and manually go around your house and figure out every outlet, every breaker, every appliance, and how everything is interconnected to each other. So the CEO looks at me and says, if I could jump through the computer screen, I would hug you. But let me add to your analogy, Gayle. How many times have you told your husband not to touch the toaster oven? Do you know when he's touching it? Because you know he's touching it. And how many times a day? And how much risk is there in him bringing your kitchen light down? I'm like, brilliant. So I had a series of contractors here doing some work last summer while I was going through this interview process. So one of them had come back in the fall. He said, did you get that job? I said, sure. He said, that's great. What do you do? So I shared this story with him. He said, I understand that. Of course you do, because that's the Gayle speak. Now, I share that story with every new hire that comes into vArmour, not because that's the way I expect them to tell the story, but if they're new to the world that we are in, it's a great simplified way to help somebody understand what it is we work on. Our tagline here is relationships matter, because we care about what's going on behind the applications, the relationships between them all. Right? But could Gayle Charach land at any better company than one whose tagline says relationships matter? So that's my other story.
There's a lot of really interesting stuff, like so many threads
to pull. Yes.
So the number one, this is more of an observation, as a sales leader, one thing, based on the stories you're telling me, based on sort of how you've been approached things, you're using cognitive empathy, user experience, empathy, stepping into the shoes of the actual person and living that journey and experiencing it. And even with, the story that you described earlier of your car buying journey, is you're really like living that experience and
Yes.
those steps and breaking them down. You're breaking down you're always leading with stories.
Yes.
And you're breaking down stories which is intuitive and emotional, into analytical and process plan initiatives. So I think you lead with emotion, but you enable that with, the science, the IQ, the plan, and all that stuff. So that's one observation. And I would love for you to speak on is that, so that's a critical skill. And then where do most people fall flat? Because, they switch to that like complicated jargon speak. And so in your experiences, has that been received well on your side? Have there been points of resistance? And how do you help people see the other way around?
So I think at the end of the day, our role as folks in the selling profession is to help people solve problems. If you can't help someone understand the nature of the problem and how you're going to solve it, how can you establish a trust with that person? how do they know that you can do what you say you can do? Right. So first and foremost, relationships is what, I mean, it's what everything is founded on. I mean, people buy from people. It's true. It's absolutely true. No matter what the process, and no matter if it's something that's even something online where we're, a piece of SaaS software where I can go in and I can buy it without ever touching a person. At some point, there's got to be some connective tissue there with something. You've got to connect on some human level. So relationship building is the most important and most foundational skill to have if you're going to be in the world of sales, because it's all about, even when we talk about the digital selling experience and exposing ourselves in LinkedIn and how do we leverage that as a tool, I was just talking to my sales development team yesterday and saying, reminding them, look, if you go to a cocktail party, a networking event, and you go to the bar and you grab yourself a drink and you turn around and there's Paul standing there and he's standing by himself. The inclination, because we're social people, is to go up and say, hey, Paul, how are you? Or no, who are you? Well, where do you work? What do you do? What brought you here? Right? And have a natural, curious conversation. Now, what I won't do is give Paul my business card, say, hi, Paul, I'm Gayle. Nice to meet you. Oh, and by the way, I sell this really cool technology that is on the inside of your house, and it's all about relationships between all your applicants. I mean, that's not the way we work as humans, right? So think of a tool like LinkedIn in the same way. It's about establishing relationships with people. It's about being curious. It's about learning from other folks, right? So yesterday on LinkedIn, as I was showing them an example, I happened to come across a post of somebody who had written a children's book about cybersecurity. And as I'm reading through the comments, there's a guy who's got a whole bunch of security designations beside his name. His name was Sean, and he had the CISSP and a bunch of other ones. And I think he's the, if I'm not mistaken, the founder of a cloud-focused technology company. All of that. So I got all of that just from looking at his LinkedIn. But what fascinated me was his post. He commented on the post and said, this is great. I've bought a copy. I can't wait to read it to my 10-year-old, who I've also brought with me to this latest security conference. And I'm like, brilliant. And I wrote a note back to him. I don't know him from Adam, but what that note said to me was, Sean, that is amazing. What I know is that there's a huge gap in security professionals right now. There are an outstanding number, probably millions of jobs available for security professionals right now that are not filled because we don't have enough. So what I thought was really cool was he's starting young. You're starting to build that capital for us at a young age. That's awesome. And I wrote that and he liked it. Well, of course he liked it because it was very personal. I'm fascinated by what he said. I would love to have truly another conversation with him, not to sell him anything, because selling isn't what I do. It's what I help people do. It's not about selling. I would be really interested in understanding why he's exposing his 10-year-old at such a young age to this stuff. What is his goal? What is he thinking about? So again, it's all about relationships. That's the foundation of everything. Now, I probably wandered far, far away from your initial question because I got off on a tangent, but
I like tangents.
There you go. So
because there's so many other threads to pull from. But before I ask you a whole bunch of other stuff, so how do you actually define sales or selling?
Selling is about helping people solve problems. It's about trust. Inherently has to be there with both parties. And really, it's about solving problems and helping people get better results than what they're getting today. If somebody has made a decision to make a change, obviously there's a problem. Selling is about understanding what that problem is. And do you have the tools to guide someone in terms of helping them solve that problem?
So a person, somebody who might be a domain expert or an SME or, whatever their corporate sort of title, whatever that is, and they naturally lean on, let's say, technobabble, jargon speak, and they feel that, by speaking in that way, they'll come off looking smart and as an expert. So how do you help them see that speaking in grade 8 language, with some of the examples that you just took, is actually, and leaning on emotion, empathy, understanding what are the intrinsic motivations and desires of the audience? How do you help them, move from that mindset? What are the challenges that you encounter when dealing with somebody who needs help, maybe speaking in front of a client, or maybe, speaking to at a conference, or helping others across the org better understand what they do from a technology perspective, or whatever that thing that they do. The
story that they have to tell. Yeah.
How do you help them communicate better in that grade 8 language and help them see the value of speaking in that? So what kind of challenges do you face, and how do you overcome those? How do you coach them through it?
So I think first and foremost, it's about doing what I'm doing right now and telling stories, right? If I can connect with them emotionally and have them see, if I can create an environment where they will see for themselves. For me, the teaching moments are all about leading the horse to the water. I can't force them to drink it. But if I lead them to really yummy water, I'm pretty much guaranteed that they're going to go in there. Or if I take them on a really hot day, when I know that they're really thirsty, I know if I bring them there, they will drink it, right? So first of all, it's going where creating a situation where they want to be there, right? So in one of my previous roles, one of my jobs was to help people figure out account planning and really get to the root of it. So I would go in, I had a program where I was working with a vendor, and I'd start each session by saying, all right, what are we here for? And, I'd get the typical answers. I'm here because this, and it's training. And my managers made me come. So that's why I'm here. Right. So you've got a lot of resistance. So fair, totally fair. But the program itself was not a hypothetical program. It was taking a real deal that they had on the table, applying some good questions to it, helping shine a flashlight on where their gaps were in this account, and helping them find the path to getting that account further through their pipeline. So at the end of the 4 hours, when it was all done, I'd sit back and say, so how was the training? And they'd look at me like, what training? We just worked on our deal. Therein lies the magic. If you're doing something that is going to be again, because what else is selling about? It's not just about solving problems. It's about bringing value to people, right? Because inherently, if I solve your problem, I will be bringing you value. But how am I going to show you that? I have to demonstrate that all the way through your buying process. I have to bring you value. So from a selling perspective, I tell my reps here, it's not about pummeling them with our content. It's about engaging them in discussions about the world around them. What are they concerned about day to day? So I think at the core, it's helping them understand who is the person you're speaking to, what do they care about, and how are you going to create the story in a meaningful way for that personality? Because if I go in and have a conversation with a CEO, it's going to sound very different than the conversation I'll have with the CIO, who may be a little bit more technical minded. While they've still got the business approach, they also have to appeal to the technical. So again, it's about helping them see who are the people that we're connecting with, what's important to them, and then being able to flush something out that is going to draw them in an emotional way. And the only way I know how to do that is to model the behavior that I expect from other people. So it would be me storytelling to pull that thread from them to make them go, interesting. And then they start to think about, okay, how could I do that myself? And how could I make it meaningful?
Beautiful. Okay. So I think this would segue really beautifully into sort of coming back to where we sort of met in the timeline. And, I'm not fully exposed to the extent of everything that was happening at that time at that organization. My understanding was, and please, fill in the gaps or challenge some of the thinking, but, that org was going through almost like a repositioning in terms of what is their value prop, because, certain elements like printing, the future of printing is, oblique, or mildly put, is under crisis.
Yes.
So that org was going through some sort of change in terms of the strategy from the top level, and then how that would then percolate down all the way to, the frontline workers, the bottom line revenue, blah, blah, blah. And I'm just making a lot of assumptions here. I saw you sort of as the bridge between the top layer strategy and how that could be translated across the org, and how people would feel in terms of, they feel motivated to come into the work because they had massive layoffs. In that time, when you have such a huge strategic change happening at the top layer, and your challenge is to sort of help bring that message across to the whole org? And I'm sure you've probably put a better lens of what was the actual challenge because I'm just making assumptions based on sort of what I interpreted based on where I was.
Yep.
But I really saw you as this sort of pivotal person who was helping translate all of that complicated strategy into simple messaging and getting people, the morale of the org back up because of all the firing that happened and all, the layoffs that happened because of change in strategy, blah, blah, blah. And a new leadership, being brought in. So how do you facilitate and what kind of conversations or tactful things that you're doing to first help people see the bigger picture and help them through those steps, and this goes to, on your LinkedIn, it says, you go through orchestrating complex change to leadership, some of those elements. And I know that this would be a good segue from what we were just talking about. Hopefully you can put together all the random stuff that I just threw at you.
So yes, it was a very interesting time. Again, this was a job that I got connected to through a mutual connection. So a vendor that I had been working with at another company, I had gone through a layoff, and he connected me up with the chief revenue officer at the printing company, and we just had a conversation over coffee, and that started the process of me coming on board. He was very rooted in understanding that sales enablement could help drive better performance. So he wanted somebody who had a little bit of a background in it, had, solid bones in that, and could bring something to the table. So that's how I came there. When I got there, I recognized that there were huge hurdles, not the least of which were conflict between the top and the bottom. So at the upper layers, there was a lot of maneuvering and strategy building and trying to pivot the company in general. But on the floor, there was the sort of common. First of all, it was an organization where I'd never seen people who had been in the same sales role for 40 years. Like, it was very old, very established. So one of the biggest challenges and hurdles I had was getting over but this is the way we've always done it mentality, right? So how do you translate brand new way of thinking and a whole pivot for the company down to people who just want to continue to do their day-to-day job? But my job is good and I'm making good money and my commissions are good. Why would I change the way I work? Well, because what you're not factoring in is, while this has been good for you until today, the future of this career for you is not here, because guess what? It's going away. I mean, my second day, I think, there, among the meetings that were set up for me was to go meet with the order people downstairs. And I walked downstairs, and the first thing they did was hold up an envelope and show me, this is where you could really help. Get the salespeople to properly write things in here. And I just looked at her and said, what is this? And she said, well, it's the order form. I said, are you telling me that they come down here and they have to physically, with a pen on an envelope, write stuff? Yeah. I'm like, we're in 1950. I mean, the world is filled with automation. Guys, you have to move along with the time. So my biggest challenge was the hurdle of the this is the way we've always done it mentality. So it's helping, I think what inherently we have to do is help people understand why this change is going to benefit them. It's one thing to come up with a company strategy and say, this is where we're pivoting to, and this is how we see the revenue, manifesting itself. But how do you translate that to execution, to the people who are feet on the street that then have to go out and make this happen? Well, it's not easy when all they're thinking is, but this is the way I've always done it, and I'm making a good living, and I've got my cottage. And if you ask me to change, I'm not going to make that good living because I don't know how to do that. Right. So I think it's first understanding at the core from the people on the street where the challenges are. And then it's marrying the two. It's saying, okay, I know what they're trying to get done at the top. How do I figure out how that translates into something that's a repeatable process? And it's really helping people understand, especially in the world of sales, because for so many years it was all art, right? The art of selling. But guess what? there, with automation comes the ability to apply science, to apply repeatable processes over time. And I think so it's first understanding that getting down on the floor, being on the floor with those people, understanding what is your day-to-day challenge, understanding the mentality and where they're coming from, understanding where the points of conflict are, and then figuring out a plan to break all of that down and try to find a way to unify, first of all, and build that trust, right? Because I had to also build trust between the top and the people on the floor, because that had eroded over time. So once all of that, and where does that all filter back to, Paul? Relationships. I had to build relationships internally. They had to build relationships with each other. So again, it was the human side that I had to crack first. And then it was bringing to the table for these folks an understanding of what's this going to do for you? What's in it for you if you do change the way you work? What does the future look like? What does good look like? No different than if I ask them to solve a problem for their client. It's all about what's going on in your world today and what negative impact is that having on you? How could we get you to an idyllic future state? What would that look like? And what problems could you solve? And what better results will you get when you get there? So in the same way, that's the value selling methodology that my selling people are applying. I apply the same thinking to the way I go to work with them, which again is back to modeling the behavior that I expect. It all comes full circle.
That is so cool. So, although you are a sales leader, you're known as, the sales sort of, you occupy that space, but all the stuff that you were describing now is not necessarily would be lumped into sales, because if you are, let's say, in consulting or advisory, there'll be like, org strategy or change management and all those, or brand internalization or some of those elements. But you're doing them, under the umbrella of sales. I don't know if that was sort of what you were, because it's like, what's the problem behind the problem?
Well, but that's what sales enablement is, right? It's facilitating better performance, right? Helping people get to a place where they're performing at the peak that they can. So I have to analyze what the problem is and what the best solution to that problem is. And part of that is understanding, okay, where are the friction points? How do we get past those friction points? So yes, it is. It's totally a consulting job. There's no question. It's internal consulting as opposed to being an external consulting role. It's definitely, and the biggest part of my job is collaborating across the company through the various silos to help people understand how to filter through to this group to make it make sense to them. The
question that I would have is, how do you improve the bandwidth between people, who are maybe in the same team and maybe in different pods? So how do you improve the bandwidth of communication between people, especially when you go into an org where people are not talking to each other? And that's why a lot of the stuff is maybe broken. So what are the tactful things that you might be doing to help improve that?
I think at a very base level, it's again, goes back to the relationships. It's starting to build those relationships. So it's me building the relationships with the individuals. Then it's me bringing teams together. So for example, marketing right now, I've been working with the marketing team here. There was a sort of a disconnect when I first got to this company, in that I didn't know what they were doing. I don't think they knew what I was doing. I knew I needed them. They knew they needed me, but we didn't understand. Long story short, we are now in a weekly meeting cadence where weekly we get together for 45 minutes, talk about what's on the table for you, what's on the table for me, how do we have to scratch each other's back. Then I bring people to the table for them. So marketing doesn't have frontline customer day-to-day interaction. Salespeople do. But marketing writes all the content that these salespeople need to do. Well, how do they know how to write the content if they're not talking to the customers? So again, what's the friction point between sales and marketing always? It's that one is directly customer facing and one is not. And I talk to marketing people all the time about, you have to understand from a sales perspective, what you produce in their minds is the fluff that they give to their customers. What I'm here to do, truthfully, what I'm here to do is help you translate that fluff into the strategy of how do I sell this, right? Because that's exactly what it is. So, perfect example here. And again, I'll go back to my storytelling. There's a woman that I'm working with here who's in marketing. She's a phenomenal content writer. I asked her to pull together a couple of pieces for me that I knew that sales were asking me for. I couldn't do it. I went back to her and I said, would you mind if I pull you into a call with so-and-so who is asking me for, and I brought the parties together. So at a very tactical level, it's putting people at the table who don't even know that they have to talk to each other, right? It's bringing, so one of the things that I do when I start at an organization, if it's a larger one, is I form a sales enablement council, and it's made up of top reps in the company. And I ask managers to do this by a nomination process, because I want the reps that can still execute on their day-to-day, but will have the time to give me an hour a month for a meeting and 4 to 5 hours a quarter working on outcomes together. What does this do? It gives me a board of directors to tell me, am I doing the right things for you? Because you're my customer. I need to understand if I'm connecting with you or if I'm not. So again, I leverage that team then to go out to the various partners that I'm collaborating with to bring the sales lens into whatever it is anyone else is doing. So even at an HR level, if I was working with HR around building sales competencies so that we could drive our efforts through a competency framework, I would still bring real salespeople to the table. When I'm buying a tool for the company, my sales team has to be the buyers, not me. I'm the one that's going to have to implement it. They're the ones that are going to be touching it and feeling it every day. I want them to be the buyers, not me. So another story about that. I have a story where at a company, I was down to a bake-off. I had my committee set up. I wanted them to be my sales team, to be a part of this buying process. Both vendors knew they were coming up to Toronto for a bake-off. I had one vendor in the morning, one in the afternoon. So the one in the morning came, it was all good. Brought coffee. They brought their VP. It was a fabulous meeting. And then in the afternoon, the second vendor didn't go as well. And as I was escorting them to the door, when I got back into the room, the sales team was all sitting around like light bulbs shining all over the tops of everyone's heads going, oh my God, we were buyers. Oh my God, is that what our competition says about us when we leave the room? Suddenly they were looking at things through a completely different lens, right? So it's putting them in situations where they can feel what it feels like to be on the other side. You know, asking you the question, if you could test drive without a salesperson, would you? Well, that I made you feel that experience for a moment, and you thought about it and said, no, I'd rather do it without, right? So right. So I think the tactical is about bringing that experience to life for them in some way and connecting on a human level in a meaningful way so that the impression is left, right?
That is beautiful. I've taken down, I've been scribbling away. Notes.
I can see frenetic notes.
I have Post-it notes everywhere. But the first thing that you said, when it comes to getting alignment across first, peers, teams, pods, and then cross-functional teams, is that you basically would go in first, build that relationship, build that bridge with them first. Yes. And then you would help them see why, how it would be helpful to talk to this other person, and then help them sort of be that intermediate person and build that bridge across first individuals and then teams and then pods, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. So Paul, you come to me looking for a particular piece of content. I'm going to come with you, walk in the door of the marketing person. We're going to sit down. We're going to talk about it. They don't know what to write because it's in your head. They need to pluck it from your head. The value of you sitting there and sharing it with them is that they're going to produce something that is much more what you need than you going, this is marketing fluff, right? It's really not rocket science. It's really simple. But it's not necessarily achievable always.
True. Especially in larger orgs where they have, they're all these silos and, they're not speaking to each other. Yeah. That's definitely. So one thing is, and then the other thing that you talked about is, of course, helping build those bridges and being like, hey, why don't you just talk to this person? Like keeping it super simple.
Yeah.
The other thing that you talked about is having people live through that experience of what it is like to be in that position, which really makes it real for them. So having that lived experience, it's like all the things that you're talking about sound almost like common sense.
Don't they?
Happens. Why do people forget all of this?
Well, I think this is one, and interesting. This might be one inherent value of having someone without the university degree doing what I'm doing, because I'm not caught up in the analysis paralysis, and I'm just the tactical, touchy-feely, get me in there, let me get my hands dirty, I'm going to do it. Right. And I really do see a difference that people that come in with all the jargon, if I don't understand it, how am I going to communicate it to somebody else? Right. So I need you to dumb it down. When we started the Sales Enablement Society years ago, around the time that you and I were at the same company together, there was a guy that was heading it up at the time that I used to argue with him all the time and say, I need you to dumb this down. Like, you're bringing me these sophisticated frameworks, but I don't know how to apply them because I don't understand them inherently. I'm a simple person. Salespeople will always say to me, Gayle, I'm a simple person. Don't complicate this, right? So I learned a long time ago, and one of my mentors into sales, KISS was his principle. That was it. It was about keeping everything short, sweet, and simple. Yeah.
Listening to all the things that you're saying, there's so many brilliant, subtle, nuanced insights that are coming out. Some tactical, some mindset, some more behavior, some more relationships, and just sort of not only just the what, but how to even think about it. It not in that like analysis paralysis, but just coming in like, this is how we've always done it. It's like one thing I've heard from this designer, his name is Tony Fadell, who created like the iPhone, the iPod.
Yep.
And he has this beautiful quote. He's like, whenever we're trying to start a new project or come up with something new and, we're putting together a team, we want people who have no idea. We don't want people who have like domain level expertise, because they're going to come in and be like, oh, this is not possible. This can't be done. So we want people to have like that childlike, looking at everything for the first time sort of mentality. Exactly. I think that's what exudes from what you're saying. It's like, you're just looking at everything like, wait, why are we doing this like this?
Well, and like, that's another, exactly. I had to figure out what my inherent value was, being that I was a sales enabler, but I'd never carried a bag for quota. So how do I justify that I'm the right person to teach you how to sell when I haven't carried that bag and I don't have that pressure of the yoke of pressure hanging over my back? It took me a long time to understand what my inherent value was. And when I came to realize what it was exactly as you just stated. I am the outside set of eyes that is childlike and not in the middle of the weeds. So if somebody's working on a deal, they're immersed in it. They bring their manager into it. They're theorizing about it. They're strategizing around it. They bring other team members in. Bring me in. Don't tell me a thing up front. I will ask you some targeted questions. I'm not in the middle of the forest so I can see the trees, right? So bringing somebody with that third set of eyes who's I'm not invested in your deal. My investment is in you and your success, not in this deal. I stand to gain nothing in my pocketbook other than the company's revenue, right? So again, I'm not coming in to interrogate you. I'm coming in to help shine a flashlight on where you might not be seeing your gaps, not because you're not super smart and super engaged in this account, but because you're so in the middle of it that sometimes you need that outside opinion. And I think that's the biggest value that any enabler, whether they have or don't have sales background, can bring to the table, is that fresh set of eyes that can simplify things, that can look at things with in a new light, right? So it's bringing a different perspective to the table.
As a sales leader, of course, you want to educate, empower, make your teams autonomous. You want them to be able to, getting the horse to the water versus giving the horse the water. Yeah. So in being more a coach than, giving them, do this. Exactly. Like a dictator. In that big picture, in that grand scheme of things, you're also wrestling with hitting results, getting, product shipped, selling, closing deals. So how do you wrestle with sort of this EQ, IQ sort of part of your job? Because, you have to also hit the targets. There's certain outcomes that need to be met. So how do you sort of wrestle with that situation, and how do you get leadership to see the value, and not only the reps to see the value, but also so that they can go do the knowledge base, do the thinking, the research, and put together some evidence of, okay, who am I talking to, get into their shoes, and also help leadership see the value of putting those hours against doing that research. And so how do you actually tackle these sort of opposing?
Again, the only way I know to bring people along for any ride is to have them want to go on that ride, right? So that's the first hurdle, is how do you make someone even want to take the journey with you, want to pack a suitcase and go on this trip together. So again, it goes back to the what's in it for you. Well, hey, if I teach you, Paul, to be a better coach to your team, you're going to drive better results in the end from that team, because you're going to have them motivated, you're going to have them energized, and you're going to have them wanting to do what you need them to get done. So again, it's about understanding the right questions. My job is no different than a salesperson's job. I have to work with the teams in the same way as they work with their clients. I have to do my discovery. I have to qualify. Is this really a problem, or is it not a problem? Or is this only the surface of the problem? And I have to dig a lot deeper to get to the root of what's even deeper in the problem. So again, it's, for me, it's a dancing. It's a dance. The whole thing is a dance. First, come in, establish yourself in some way, bring value to the team in a meaningful way so that trust is established. Because I'm coming in from out of nowhere. Who am I? Who am I to them? Again, I'm the enabler, not their sales manager. I'm responsible to, but not for them. So I don't own these people where I can drive their continued behavior. I have to partner with their sales leaders. Right. So that's another huge collaboration piece, is being able to, how do I get a seat at the table, at that leader's table, so that I can understand what's going on? And for me, it's being exposed to what's going on in the business. I love what I do here because I'm reporting directly to the chief revenue officer. I have insight into what's going on. I'm on the forecast calls weekly. I'm on the leadership calls. So I know what's going on. I can see what's going on. And in my head, I can strategize then about all the threads that I'm going to have to pull to make this work downstream. So I don't know if I answered the question or not, but that's really, it's about building the trusted relationships internally so that people see the value that you bring to the table, and helping them see where the gaps are, not in a way that says you're not doing your job, but in a way that says, I'm coming in with a fresh set of eyes. Have you considered this possibility? Have you considered that? And having a good discussion around it. So again, I also believe that unless people make the decision themselves, nothing is going to change, right? So the trick in good enablement, the trick, the science, the whatever, the edge is, how do I get people to see the value that they will inherently derive from something? That's the only way I know how to bring them along for the ride. So my personal best practice is go where I'm wanted. If I've got 6 sales teams and one is chomping at the bit and says, Gayle, I love your energy. I'd love you to come in. My team will be your guinea pig, your test case. That's where I'm going to go. I'm going to start there, because what I know for a fact is when other teams start to see the results that these ones are driving, the story's going to change. And that's exactly what happened with the story that I shared with you around the program that I was doing, going around from city to city, talking to account teams and helping them move their deals through the pipeline. It was exactly, I had one team in New York that was, no matter what I tried, their sales manager was not getting back to me. I'm like, dude, you have to do this. You have no choice. Your leader said your team has to do it. You can keep avoiding my calls, then he got word of what it was doing for another team who did buy into it. And he's like, all right. I'll take your call, Gayle. So he took my call. I went down. At the time, I was a smoker. He was a smoker, that sales leader. We went down at the first break for a cigarette together. And he looked at me and said, I cannot even believe I didn't answer your calls. I'm like, la, 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 la. But again, he needed to see it for himself. And the only way he was brought on board was because he saw results that somebody else was driving. It wasn't because someone dragged him and said, you have to be here. It was because a little whisper in his ear said, all right, maybe there's something to this. And then he, again, the other challenge is, how do you get somebody to come in with that open mind? Right? I mean, yeah, he may have been dragged along, but if he doesn't come in with the mind that's open enough to understand that this change can be good, I'm not going to get anywhere. So I do recognize that.
Right. So there's a couple of things. One is, that there are, people that can have the vision and imagine what the results and the outcomes are going to be. And then some people need to see it first to implement something.
100%.
And so I think that story, the example that you took is like a perfect sort of definition of that. What some people have the vision and they know that this is the journey they need to take.
Yeah.
And, they get proactive and others are more reactive once they see that it's worked with somebody else or they didn't fail at it. And then they want to sort of employ that or deploy that themselves. So now I have actually a two-part question. One is, a lot of the culture and behavior is also a result of sort of the incentives designed around how those people are working. So that's the first part. Is I would love for you to talk a little bit about how do you design, great incentive structures around your teams so that they enable and then you can get those kind of behaviors instead of telling people to change.
It's a really great question. And it's one of the things that I often have to drill into is, why is something not going right? Why is a product not selling off the shelves? Why are the people who are trying to sell this having so much difficulty moving it? Well, it's funny. One of my first jobs in enablement really was at Symantec, which was huge. And the teams there had about 180 products in their bag to sell. Why were some products moving and others not? Because the incentive structure around it was better, right? I mean, if I know that everybody is asking for this, that's what I'm going to sell. Why would I go try to sell this when nobody's asking me for it? So they're going to go where the market is going, right? So it's just like anything else. So designing, I've not been on the operational side to actually design a full incentive program, but from an enablement purvey, I will come in and talk to a sales leader about, if you really want this to move, you're going to have to incentivize it in some way. Let's create a spiff around it if there's not enough excitement. Let's figure out if the reason, I have to get into the weeds and figure it out. Is it not moving because they don't know how to move it? They don't know enough about it to have the confidence to talk about it? Do they not understand the problem it solves? Is it a problem of incentivization that if product A is going to move and product B is going to take a longer cycle, I'm going to sit in A. I'm going to make my money that way, right? So some people want that transactional world, and some people do have that strategic vision. And I think that takes me all the way back then again to the HR perspective to say, from a skills perspective, do you understand the nature of your sales team? Right? So who do you have? Hunters? Do you have farmers? We had a ton of farmers at the company that you and I were at. We had very few hunters, and that was a big problem. So again, it became do we look at the incentive? Are we not incenting properly to bring the hunters in? The people, how do we change the people that are only farming to help them see that they have a bigger role, that they could make these accounts grow even more if they were a little more proactive? So there's so many things that play into it, and there's so much analysis that's got to go in to understanding what's the root of these problems, right? So I have not built incentive programs, but I can tell you that I've certainly gone back to sales leaders over the years and said, this is not going to move, and here are the reasons why. And sometimes they are incentive related. There's no question. Even something to say that what would drive an engineer if I've got a complex sale that requires a sales engineer to come along for the ride, if they're not properly incentivized for this particular product, they're going to pick someone else. Typically there's not a 1-to-1 ratio of SEs to sales. It's often 1 to many. So why is the SE going to pick my job over your job when he's going to get paid out more on you than on me? right? So it all trickles back. So as an enabler, my role is to understand why things are not going well, and could incentive be part of the problem. Some people think of sales enablement and they think, oh, you're the sales trainer. No, I'm not. I may look at a problem. I'm a diagnostician is what I am. I diagnose where the problems are and then find solutions to fix them. So, a problem may be training related. Yeah, they don't know enough about this product yet. We didn't do a good job of readiness, sales readiness before we launched. And that's why it's not moving. Or is it an incentive issue? Or is it a change management issue? So that's the hardest job, but the most fascinating one, right? To get under the hood and figure out what the problem is, and then offer up options for solutions.
Right. Okay. A couple of things. One is, as part of sales enablement, what I'm gathering and what I'm taking away is that you're actually doing system level thinking. You're thinking about how one thing over here is connected to that thing, is connected to that thing, to that person, to that process, to that, that brochure is connected to all those different pieces are connected, and how they all lead back to the big picture. Customer buying. And so to be a great enablement person or a leader, I would say you have to have that systems thinking approach completely to it. So now I wanted to actually jump back one step and ask you a question which I've been thinking about, pondering over. I have been listening to you the whole time, so I wrote it down.
I do know that.
Just making sure
that cover all the bases.
Imagining the question and thinking about when will I ask this question, but more about, you described it really well that, you filter out what journey you're going to join, or which company you're going to join, because do they even want this? But have you ever found yourself in a team or a company where you got in for whatever reason, turned out that the executives had a different picture, and maybe at that time, the executive had a different vision, but management and all the people in the front line had a different challenge and problem, and maybe you had to build a case and listen to those people and take it back to executives and say, guys, we have this great plan. We have all these initiatives, but they're not lining up with the big strategy, and helping connect those dots. Have you ever been in that position? And what did you actually end up doing if you were in that position?
I have been. And that's why my sales enablement groups, my sales executive council has always been of prime importance to me, because that gives me the validation to go back and say, it's not sitting with who you need to execute on it. Right. So again, remember, I'm plucking these people as the chosen ones among us to be, they're the top salespeople. So you're Mr. Executive, you're going to expect something from these people. You need to come in and listen to what they have to say. So again, I've been in this situation a number of times where I have the Sales Enablement Council has brought things forward. I try to take them and put them in the right place, right? I've got this level of concern from the Sales Enablement Society. This is something that they've identified as broken that needs fixing. Mr. Sales Operations Leader, this sits in your house. Mr. Marketing Leader, this sits in your house. Mr. Leader of Sales, you're asking from them what's impossible. You will not get it from them. And here's why. So again, it's bringing those people to the table, where I've gone back to the RVP, the Regional Vice President, or the CRO, and said, you need to come and sit down and have a discussion with the Sales Enablement Group, or the Sales Executive Council. And again, for me, I like to think of myself sometimes, not only as the diagnostician, but I'm that funnel. The joy of my job is that I do get to see all the purvey of what you talked about, right? I've got my hands in a little bit of everything, so I'm seeing a little bit of everything. I'm the dot connector. I'm that filter into sales that can I've got the resources at the sales level that I can bring back to you the feedback that you're looking for. But conversely, I need you to bring back the value to the people that you're trying to get to go out and do the job that we need to get done. So it's connecting dots.
Right. Are there any tactical or like specific workshops or things that you might recall in which you were helping, the people at the bottom of the org have a communication line with the people at the top where there might be some of those gaps? Do you recall anything at all that you remember which was successful or didn't work, which you would advise people to avoid going down those paths or advise?
Yeah. So, I mean, if I think about one situation where I was trying to enable a leadership team with some really good empowerment around being truly good leaders, because I felt like a lot of the managers that we had in place were the super sales reps that have been promoted because they were super sales reps, but they had no people skills to manage people. Nobody had imparted that to them along the way. And given that my philosophy is one of they have to self-select what they will buy into, I purposely lean on training partners who I know will bring that same methodology to the table. So I brought this guy who I had at many companies before, and every sales leader that I had put through his training had remained in touch with him, kept him as a mentor, et cetera, et cetera. I brought him to this one group. It was a relatively young sales manager group. They were definitely resistant. He was more suit and tie, old school. They were more t-shirt and jeans. So there, right away, there's that. There was one eager beaver manager who wanted to suck on everything that came out of this guy's mouth. And he sat in the front and asked a bunch of questions, but everybody else thought it was just obnoxious. So there was a complete fail on my part. Right? I mean, I guess I didn't read the audience well to know which one to bring in. Now, the goal of this exercise was, again, to come back and put some kind of management framework in place for these people to say, here's the cadence that you need to adhere to. Here's the duties that are inherent in your job. But I'm going to give you a view of 15 of these practices. You guys are going to self-select which of these 15 do you buy into, which are right for our organization, because we can't focus on all of them. And then if they make the commitment to those 7 things out of 15, then I'll throw them together in a management handbook and we'll have that as our guidebook, right? It just didn't work. It just didn't work. There were every other organization I brought this guy to, it worked. They wanted to stay in touch. I still continue to get, as a matter of fact, I had brought him to DCM. That was one of the places that he had come. And that one went particularly well. And we did self-select. We as a team said, here are the practices that we want to put into play. And again, I had all the right players in the room because it wasn't only the sales management team that had to be exposed to this. It was the peripheral. I had to bring in the marketing person and the HR person because I wanted them to see and understand what the challenges of these frontline managers were, because they played into them as well, right? Hey, HR, maybe think about the skill set that you should be hiring for management, right? Marketing, maybe think about the gaps that these guys are talking about and where you can help them. Instead of just pushing leads, really listen to them about what they're looking for in those leads, right? So bringing all the other players to the table so that there was this opportunity to create a common language that would break down silos. So some places it's gone great, some places it's not gone great.
The one fundamental question that I haven't asked throughout this whole conversation is, what actually brought you or got you in sales?
So funny you ask. So my story is, as I shared with you, I've had 5 career pivots in my lifetime. So I was a teacher. I was teaching elementary school level. I was teaching Hebrew language and art. I was going through a divorce and realized I couldn't sustain my daughter and myself on my $20,000 a year 10-month a year contract job. And every summer I was applying for unemployment. So I went to the Canadian government and said, hey, how about instead of me collecting unemployment every year, you invest in retraining me into a profession where I can work year round, and I won't have to knock on your door every summer. And I got $13,000, and thus was born the Second Career program through the Government of Canada. So they made me go through an exhaustive process of understanding what careers were hot. I had to go and interview people who were going through career change into that. I had to interview companies who were training people, companies who had hired people who had come out of Second Career programs, and then make a case back to the government about why they should invest in this career for me. So I discovered the MCSE program. I didn't even know a year before how to turn on a computer. And my only thought was I had to teach myself DOS to get into the program. So my only thought was, I'm tired. I'm exhausted of the people part of my job, teaching, the discipline, the classroom stuff. I'll interface with a machine. It'll be just me and the machine. It'll be all good. So after probably 3 or 4 months in the program, my trainers were coming at me laughing, going, have you even paid attention to the fact that you're organizing study groups? You're building flashcards around networking concepts, for God's sake, Gayle. You are a teacher. It's in your blood. It's who you are. So they were the ones that said to me, you don't throw away an old skill set. You merge the old with the new. So take your technology skills that you've now got, merge them with your teaching skills, and that's the career that you build. So I got great guidance from them and ended up getting hired by the company that I took my training from to be a second career coach for other people. So thus began my career as a tech trainer. Hated the curriculum, as I mentioned earlier. So I started building my own supplemental stuff to get concepts across, and got a call from a former trainer in the program who said, I've got a job. It's got your name written all over it. It's developing courseware for our proprietary software. Thus began my career in instructional design, which I didn't even know what that was until I started doing it. So then I got into instructional design fundamentals and understanding that whole world. So my world became around building training. And then from there, I was at a couple of different companies, and along the way, I had experience for, I think, a 6-month period as a business analyst, which also, I'm like, me, a business analyst, that's hilarious. I don't even know where to start with this. And then a job came open at Semantic doing instructional design, but instead of being on the technical side of the house, it was on the sales side. And I went in with a great deal of trepidation because I'm like, I don't know this audience. I'm not sure. But at the same time, I was tired of the deepness of the technical weeds. And I thought, you know what? Sales needs to understand things at a much higher concept. So I'm going to go with that. So I came in, I passed the interview with flying colors in spite of them challenging me with some really great questions around, but you've never been a seller. How do you know what they need? Well, because I do needs analysis. That's part of my job. So I was in there. From there, I got plucked from within Semantic by somebody else to say, I need you over here to be a performance consultant. So the performance consulting was being a learning and development kind of person I was connected up to the channel organization within the company, and I was their interface into training. So, and enablement. So basically I had to determine where the gaps were in performance and come to the table with the right solutions, which was the start of Sales Enablement. So this was almost 20 years ago, before Sales Enablement had traction, before it was a thing, before people had defined it. And that was how I got into my role, and eventually was handed over all the skills-based training and said, you own this. So now we had a sales team at the time. There were about 5,000 salespeople. So it was, globally determining what were the skills required for everybody and sourcing the right programs, following them, gathering the metrics from them, demonstrating the results of them, et cetera. So that's how my transition into Sales Enablement, where it started and where I started and where it is now.
That is such a cool story. And I think that there's so much to be learned from the journey, the story that you described.
Yeah.
So a couple of observations. One is, and this is something that you also have on your LinkedIn profile, so I'm just connecting the dots, is that, you were constantly putting yourself in positions where you didn't have necessarily everything figured out.
No.
Right. And sometimes you're not even the technical person. Right. And, but you constantly put yourself in positions where you were like, you know what, I'm going to figure it out. And you trusted yourself to figure it out.
Yeah.
And there's like that imposter syndrome sort of
Yes, totally.
piece to it. Now, I've also observed with other colleagues, especially, and this might be like a gross sort of generalization, but women typically tend to, till they don't have everything figured out, they don't want to put themselves constantly in that position of like, that's why they don't get promoted. And something that you are constantly doing inherently is you're like, you know what, let me try this out. Let me figure it out. I'm just going to challenge this is how we've always done it mentality.
Exactly.
And that's helped you sort of grow in your career.
Absolutely. So
how did you sort of wrestle with this like imposter syndrome and this mindset? And then how has that helped you grow so fast? And that could be advice for, especially women listening or other people who are sort of struggling with the, this sort of mental limiting belief.
So it's not only did I have a huge sense of imposter syndrome of my own, just based on the fact that I'm like, I don't know if I understand this. Like, what if I'm giving them the wrong? It was not only that, it was the imposter syndrome piece of feeling like I didn't have the credibility I needed. But on top of that, we had a leader at that time. This would have been probably I spent 7 years at Symantec. It would probably have been about 5 years in, 3 or 5 years in, who kept insisting that he was a new director into the sales enablement world. And we're not hiring anyone else in sales enablement who doesn't have a sales background. And he kept harping on that. And I'm like, you're making me feel like I'm this small. Like now, at the time, we all had a budgeted amount for training. So budget time was coming up. My leader reached out and said, hey, you've got, this $3,000 to spend. What are you going to use it for? And I said, you know what, rather than going for a training course, would it be okay if I got some coaching sessions? She said, sure. So I arranged for, I think it bought me 5 or 6 coaching sessions. It was all remote by a woman who lived probably a 10-minute drive from me, all by phone because there was no Zoom back in those days. And it was in one of the calls with her that, again, one of the joys of coaching is that it asks you to come to conclusions. A good coach is going to ask the right questions that's going to get you to come to your own conclusions. And at one point, we're in the middle of talking, and I said, you know what? I am credible, and I do make a difference. She said, stop. Get your pen, get a Post-it note. The Post-it note is still sitting on top of my desk. I am credible, and I do make a difference. I went to San Francisco shortly after that. I had a business meeting there. And while I was there, I hooked up with a former vice president of sales who had been a vendor trainer to me. We met for coffee and I said, Tom, I'm really wrestling with this and I don't know how to get over it. And it's because our leader, who he knew well, is saying this. And he's the one who said to me, Gayle, when you're here, I'm looking at things from a very different perspective. And that's what you bring to the table. You bring that fresh set of eyes. We don't need people who live and breathe what we do all day, every day. We need people who can come in from the outside and say, I don't live and breathe. And so therefore I can see things that you may not see. So that's how I overcame my imposter syndrome. And to this day, that's what I do when people reach out for any kind of mentoring. And I've had many people over the years who have said, Gayle, you were so great to work with. I've got some young incoming enablers. You're OG. I'm like, please don't tell me that means old. Yeah, it does. You're OG. I'd love for them to learn from you. And that's the 2 tips that I typically share are Sales Executive Council. That's going to give you your board of directors to check in with, are you doing the right things? And the second thing is understand the value that you bring. And that is that you are not immersed in this world day to day. So those are the 2 things I bring to the table when I'm mentoring young incoming enablers about what to think about. Because again, imposter syndrome is huge. And probably you're right. It's probably even more so in women. We don't want to appear to be too vulnerable, right? So asking, questions might make someone think that we don't understand I've always challenged myself without a doubt. I'm a hands-on learner. I'm absolutely kinesthetic. I need to do it to be able to see it. That's how I've overcome imposter syndrome.
So I have one sort of question that is a little bit of a thread from that same point that you just made.
Yeah.
Now, sales is typically, and sort of, you've described like a long journey that you've had and a very interesting and fun journey that you've had. is that it's primarily male dominated. If I'm making the correct assumption,
100%, especially in technology.
So maybe like for other women who might want to be in sales or sort of playing these roles, or were there specific things that you were doing to navigate through all of that? You know, for other women, you know, especially who want to maybe get into sales, but see it as like a male dominated sort of space.
The women sales people that I have met have been the most successful salespeople, among the most successful salespeople that I've met. So there is something to be said for the women's touch. Maybe, you know, maybe there's a little higher emotional intelligence. I don't know what it is. I haven't put my finger on it to say. And you don't want to clump everything into everybody's like this, because there are many male sales folks that I know who are very emotionally intelligent, very much connect on a vulnerable level with their clients. But for women, I think it's just hold your head up high and be confident. There's no reason you aren't equally as committed, as loyal, as capable as any man sitting at any table. So, you know, I try not to look at, it's funny because with the whole Black Lives Matter and, well, I don't see color. Well, if you don't see color, that's also part of the problem, right? It's like, you can't say I don't see color. Of course, I see that you're a different color than me. Do I see past that you're a person? I don't see the color first. I see the person first. So it's kind of that situation is don't go in and, you know, I mean, we're our own worst enemies in that respect, right? When you're doubting your confidence, that's the worst. So do what you can do to help boost your confidence. Is it getting mentoring from someone? Is it going and taking a few coaching sessions from somebody instead of maybe taking a workshop on leadership skills, right? Maybe it is going and getting, you know, put yourself in uncomfortable situations, but be prepared and feel confident. There's, you know, again, I think a good relationship builder is going to be able to survive no matter what the environment. But I've also left places before because I felt like there was favoritism to the men over the women. This is not a comfortable place for me to be. So
right.
I think it's all about the confidence. If you come in with the same swagger, there's no reason you're not going to perform this job. And think about it. Women are great problem solvers, typically, right? So sales is a great place for them to be. I think we bring a lot to the table, women for sure. And like I said, I've seen women ramp faster on average than men do into sales jobs. So yeah, go in with confidence, hold your head high.
I think there's some like biological truth to it that women are interested in people and men are interested in things. And this business is of relationships and people. It's
exactly.
Again, just a little bit of a generalization, but there is some thread in biology and science there.
Yeah. Especially being as OG as I am, I will agree.
Yeah, even when I was there, you know, when we were working together, and I have, you know, of course I have limited memories of that place, but you know, there's certain people that you always meet and they sort of stand out, and you were just like a force, you know, that you just sort of stood your ground and you were just like confident, even the way your posture, the way you did things. And I was like, wow, you know, you don't see that often in specifically sales specific contexts. For audience, especially who are women listening, you know, that they shouldn't hold back. There should be no limiting belief. And
one thing I think, you know, I may make it sound easy. I don't mean to, because I'm not suggesting that it was ever easy. But I persevered. As a matter of fact, one of my awards along the way was called the Bulldog Award, because I persevered. I was persistent. I didn't let up. I knew what the right thing to do was, and I held my ground. So I got a Bulldog Award for being tenacious. So, you know, I don't want to make it sound like it's easy. And I think the other advantage I have is that at this stage of my career, with this color hair that I have, I've been around the block a few times. The older you get, the wiser you get. It is absolutely true. And the more confidence you gain, because you start to care less about what people think or how people, it's about, am I happy with who I am? And if I can live with me, and I see that people aren't like spitting on me, then that's good. That's a good thing. So I think, listen, with wisdom, with age comes wisdom is absolutely true. I don't want to make it sound like it's really easy, and I can understand and appreciate the struggles of the younger women in the up and coming. But again, no reason why. There are all kinds of resources out there today for us, for anyone to gain confidence, to build your confidence. And that's what's going to help you succeed in any world you choose, whether it's profit, nonprofit, government. It's about confidence.
Right. No, and I think to one of the points that we were discussing earlier, for some people, they need to see somebody else doing this thing, and then they can see the path for themselves. They're like, wait, it's like, when somebody did that Fosbury flop or something.
Yes.
It's like, that's an example they use. Like, so once somebody, like, till the time somebody did it for the first time, they're like, wait a second. Oh, wait, we've been just thinking about this all wrong. So it's like a breakthrough moment for somebody when they hear some of these stories. So this was super helpful. So here's what we're going to do now. First, I'm just going to do a quick summary of what we've learned and just summarize some of the highlight reel. Yep. I have all these post-it notes.
I gave you a huge challenge today.
No, it was a lot of fun. I've learned so much, able to connect some of those dots. And then the second thing we're going to do is I have a fun activity that'll take like 2 minutes, literally. And then finally, you can think about, any closing remarks that you might have to where people can connect with you. Any other final thoughts, words, that you have, lingering ideas that you want to sort of leave the audience with? While I sort of summarize, you'll have sufficient time to sort of collect your thoughts. So I'm going to just quickly summarize that, that you've had like a very interesting upbringing. You've grown up in a small town. You've spent time in being a camp counselor to being a teacher. And we can see through the conversations that we've had that thread, those learnings have carried forward in all the work that you're doing. Absolutely. That you're being this coach, you're helping people go, helping the horse get to the water, and helping them realize their own answer. I think one merit of that is that when you help people find the answer, they own that answer, and they feel smart and great about coming to that realization, and then they can run with it. It's not something that somebody told them to do. It's actually coming from within. So there's beauty in that. And then, you also talked about the merit of this coming in with this analysis paralysis, that you are not weighed down by all this corporate jargon speak. You come in with fresh set of eyes, and you're always thinking systems thinking, because you're building these relationships. By building those relationships across the org, you're able to deploy system thinkings by default, because you're curious about how everybody's working and how everybody can help each other. So you're that connecting the dots, helping each other. And then really the role of sales enablement in terms of coaching and guiding and finding the friction points and removing them out of people's way, versus getting down and tactful in and picking up the phone and making those calls. It's actually more about looking at it holistically and tying the executive to the sales rep, all those dots in the middle, and removing those friction points. So that was really beautifully said. The other thing was how you also talked about, the enabling those leaders, and, at a point where there's non-alignment, how you let them self-select. Again, it goes back to that coaching, getting them to agree on what they already believe in and lining that up. That was so beautifully said. What I would want to leave off with is, especially, women, who might look at you as a great example of, that it is possible. And you don't have to be a subject matter expert by the traditional sort of, definition of it. You can come in being curious, inquisitive, and learn and figure it out. And then finally, one absolute final thought that I don't want to miss. It's actually more valuable to speak from stories and in grade 8 language, which resonates with everybody, versus trying to sound smart and tuning everybody out. Hopefully I've summarized that.
That's amazing. I'm going to go back and listen to this podcast. I love the way you summarized it. Brilliant.
Okay. So I have one fun activity. And so this is a book. It's called
All About Me. Okay.
You're right. So now this book basically has about 3,001 questions. So now you have to pick a number between 1 and 3,001.
2091.
2091. Okay, hold on. the book doesn't have page numbers, but 2091. Okay, hold on. Okay, I found it. I'll read it out and I'll put it on the screen.
Okay.
So is there a date I always commemorate that is not my birthday or a major holiday? Hopefully you can see it.
Is there a date that I always celebrate?
It's right here. I know there's like a whole bunch of stuff.
Okay. Is there a date? Let me think about that for a second. It's funny. I guess it's really made it. I don't know that I celebrate it, but I acknowledge it every year. August 16th is the day that Elvis died. And why does that stick in my memory? Because I was on my way home from Israel from having spent my year there. So I was 16 years old, traveling home by myself, wearing a jalabia. That's all I had on, which is a long robe thing. Walking through, I had to stop in Heathrow. And as I'm going through Heathrow, I hear Hare Krishna. And I'm like, yeah, okay, whatever. So it was that kind of a look. But again, I'm coming home from Israel with this free-spirited whatever. And on the plane ride home, the pilot came on and announced that Elvis had died. And so that date is forever imprinted in my brain, that August 16th was the day I came home from Israel the first time, which was so heavily sad for me, right? So I don't know that I celebrate it, but I certainly remember it every year. And that's why it stuck out for me. Weird. I've never even thought about that. Otherwise, it would have I could care less when Elvis lived or died, to be frank. It's not like I'm a huge Elvis fan or anything, but it just somehow stuck with me.
Wow. That is so cool. I mean, now it's on tape and we have
now it's recorded for posterity. Oh my gosh.
Well, this has been such a fun conversation. I would love to bring you back and, pick your brain and learn a lot more. For sure. But I would love for you to, leave the audience with where they can connect with you. What's the best way to do that? And then any final words, remarks before we close and land this thing.
So I would say definitely LinkedIn is the best bet to connect with me. But please, if you do reach out to me, give me some connection point to tell me who you are and why you're reaching out to me. One of the banes of my existence is I'd like to connect on LinkedIn. If you can't take the time to tell me why you'd like to connect, you're probably not going to get me to accept your connection response. So please tell me you heard me on Paul's podcast and that's why you want to connect. I'll be happy to connect. In terms of parting words, I think, at the source, from a sales enablement perspective, it takes a village. There's no question. And the biggest challenge we have as enablers is building the collateral that we need to succeed, but building the collaborative relationships and breaking down silos in an organization. That's the only way I know to be able to succeed in helping drive revenue for a company and doing the job we have to do. So even though I'm a one-woman band, technically in enablement, I have partners all over the company because I've created those partnerships. I've made sure that I've brought the right people to the table for the right things. Be rigid in the pursuit of that dream that you have, but be flexible in the path to get there. There's constant change. There's, especially in the world of technology. If you can't adapt to change, this isn't the world for you. What motivates you? Think about that. I remember my daughter telling me when she was midway through her degree, I think I'm going to change to dentistry. I'm like, dentistry? She was born marketeer. I'm like, why dentistry? You've never expressed an interest in learning, looking into people's mouths. Well, because it'll make me a good income. And then when I become a mom, I won't have to work full time. I'm like, but you won't want to get out of bed and go to work every day. You have to find what motivates you. That's the only way that you're going to be successful in getting up and appearing in the workplace every day. Again, challenge yourselves and build that confidence. Those are the things that I would say have helped me over time. And be happy doing what you're doing. If you're not happy, you're probably not doing the right thing for you.
This has been a fantastic conversation. And for the audience listening, I will leave the links to Gayle's LinkedIn profile in the show notes and be sure to reach out to her. But remember her instructions because you just get rejected.
I will decline to accept if I don't understand who you are.